competitive compared to other students. Okay, so you heard me mention this whole A through G minimum requirements thing, right? So just to kind of give you a broad overview of these, so you're required to take history, which is their A requirement for 2 years, English for 4 years, math, 3 years required, 4 years recommended, science, 2 years required, 3 recommended, language other than English. This is what LOTE means, which is basically your foreign language requirement. They say 2 years required, 3 recommended, but this does not mean like you having to physically take 2 or 3 years of a foreign language. It just means the highest level. So 2 years means up to, like, let's say Spanish 2, French 2, whatever, right? 3 years recommended. So let's say, for example, you were a freshman and you took AP Chinese. That's equivalent to year 4. Right. So this does not mean that the UCs want you to take 2 more years of a foreign language if you're already in AP Chinese as a freshman. Okay. All right. There's also a 1-year requirement for visual and performing arts. And one key thing here is that it has to be 1 full year of the same discipline. I know for some schools, they might only offer a semester of each. So you can't mix and match. You can't take like a semester of dance and a semester of, let's say, painting and have that count as your full year. So it's got to be the same year. Okay, and then lastly, you also have at least 1 year required of a college preparatory elective, but anything above and beyond the requirements here for A through F could also satisfy that elective requirement. It doesn't necessarily have to be something listed as a G requirement for your high school, okay? All right, so how do the UCs determine this? There are 3 main types of GPAs that the UCs look at. They look at your unweighted GPA, what's called your UC cap GPA, and your fully weighted GPA. I think some people are under the mistaken impression because they hear about the cap GPA, where the UCs only look at 10th and 11th grade for this cap GPA, and they only weigh a total of 8 weighted honors or AP or IB semesters as part of this capped GPA. That, however, is largely used for UC eligibility. It just dictates whether or not you can apply to their campus. These days, especially the most competitive UC campuses like UC Berkeley and UCLA will have access to and evaluate you on your fully weighted GPA, including your freshman year. Now, of course, more weight is going to be placed on 10th and 11th grade. They're not going to be turn a blind eye entirely to your freshman year. But even if you struggled, a little bit freshman year, it's probably not going to hurt you nearly as much if you've done really well in 10th grade and 11th grade, okay? So we've had some students in the past get like B's and C's freshman year, but if they manage to turn a corner and do really well academically for their next 2 years, they actually have a more competitive shot and to get into a lot of UC campuses, despite freshman year not necessarily being as good as the other years, okay? All right, so one of the key things that some people aren't told is that beyond just that weighted cap GPA, students can actually take additional coursework like additional honors or AP credits outside of your high school, right? So one of the more common ways that students have done this in the past is that if you were to actually take community college courses or UC courses through like UCR, UC Berkeley, that actually counts even the summer before 10th grade and even the summer after 11th grade. However, once it hits 12th grade in the fall already, none of the coursework there in terms of the grades will be considered. So your last chance potentially to boost your transcript is this summer if you're a rising senior, okay? So good thing to note, because if your GPA wasn't all that great, one of the best things you can do the summer before you apply is to maybe take 1 or 2 additional courses in order to strengthen your transcript before you do the UC application, okay? Okay, so moving into the UC application itself, so you'll note here that you are allowed to accept or to choose 1 main major and then an alternate or backup major. Notice here there's no provision for you to put a minor just yet when you're applying, nor can you say that you're doing a double major. So this simply means that they will consider you for your major first, your first choice major, and then if they can't accept you for it, they will accept you for your alternate or your backup major, right? Now, there are some key sort of caveats to that. For UCLA, for instance, they will only consider you for an alt major if it's within the same school or college as your main choice major, which means if your first choice major was something in their School of Engineering, their Samuel School of Engineering, your alt major should also be in the School of Engineering. Otherwise, it's sort of like a wasted slot. They won't consider you for it. For most other UCs, the strategy would be for you to pick a main major into like hopefully maybe something more competitive, and then your alt major would be something safer. So that way, if they didn't consider you for your harder major, you have a shot for the easier one. Okay. Now, so before you actually select your major, even before you fill in the application, it makes a lot of sense for you to start doing research on what are called impacted majors, which are the most competitive majors at certain UC campuses. Because if you're going head on with students in the most competitive or selective majors, it might make it much more difficult for you to get in, right? So potentially what you could do is you can go ahead and apply for certain majors that are a little bit less commonly applied to, or have a history of having an easier acceptance rate, and then going for that, or at least putting an alt major that is not what's called impacted. Okay. It's also important for the UCs for them to see evidence for interest in and preparation for your major. So they want to see that some of your activities at least align with the interest in your major so that they can see that you would be very competitive for it. Okay, now we also recommend that at least one of your 4 personal insight questions, or the essays for the UC system, which we'll get to in a bit here, should be about your interest and preparation in your major. Okay, so we'll take a look at the different prompt numbers later on. Okay, now I do have to warn you though that some majors you cannot change into if you didn't get accepted to outright as a freshman. So, you don't want to be locked out of a certain major. So you might want to do some research, because let's say, for example, you weren't accepted to the School of Engineering at Berkeley, right? So chances are very slim and sometimes impossible, depending on the actual major, for you to change to, let's say, the electrical engineering and computer science major in Berkeley's College of Engineering, right? So if you weren't accepted outright, you can't change to it. So you definitely have to do your homework. Check to see which majors you can change to if you got accepted to a certain college or school within the UC campus that you're looking into. Okay. All right. So one UC, which is UC San Diego, right? So the UC San Diego campus is, I think, the only UC that explicitly states which majors are actually impacted. They call them capped majors. So for UC San Diego, their entire School of Biological Sciences is impacted, as are fields like data science, physics, public health, and all the majors within their Jacobs School of Engineering. Okay, so these would make it harder for you to get into. So for UC San Diego, it makes sense that if you're picking a capped major as your main choice major, your alternative or backup major should be a non-capped major. Okay. All right. So maybe to kind of give you some guidance to see what UCs are strongest in, I've also listed certain campuses by their ranking for certain fields, because I think for some of you, it'd be easier to see which UCs are actually competitive for certain kind of like popular pre-professional fields. So I'll start with business, right? So the most notable UCs for undergraduate business are UC Berkeley, then UC Irvine, San Diego, and Riverside. You will need to note, though, that UCLA is also very strong in terms of preparation for business, but they don't have an outright undergraduate business major. They have what's called a business economics major, which is still much more econ oriented. But many students who go to UCLA end up doing really well for MBA programs if they majored in this. So nominally, it's not an undergraduate business major, but it serves the same purpose. Okay, so therefore, it's not really ranked by US News for undergrad business. Okay. Next up, we have undergraduate engineering. A lot of students these days, look at engineering as a possible pathway. So Berkeley, not surprisingly, is going to be the top one listed. Then you have UCLA and San Diego still also within the top 20. But you'll notice that even Davis, Santa Barbara, and Irvine are all still relatively strong in the top 40. So that's definitely something to keep in mind, and also an incentive for you to want to apply to more UC campuses, because honestly, even mid-tier UCs tend to be outstanding for undergraduate engineering relative to the other universities across the country. Specifically for computer science, practically every UC, with the exception of UC Merced, is in the top 60, in the top 56 even here, right? So if you're interested in computer science, just simply applying to most, if not all, the UCs would actually be a smart play on your part, because you would get access to and be considered for some outstanding programs specifically for computer science, right? Now, if you're interested in pre-med, not surprisingly, many of the UCs are outstanding for that as well. Schools like Berkeley, UCLA, San Diego has, like I mentioned, an awesome school of biological sciences, right? Davis and Irvine are also outstanding, right? And then lastly, there's not really a pre-law major, but as a way to gauge the relative strength in terms of like social sciences for a school, Berkeley and San Diego would be the top two choices there, followed then by UCLA, right? And obviously it depends on whatever major you pick specifically. It could be like a history or English major. Shoot, you could be a math major and apply to law school, right? So there's not technically a designated pre-law major. So if you're interested in becoming a lawyer and you got into one of these UCs, just pick a major that I typically tell students, pick a major that teaches you how to think very critically and to write well, right? Because those are two of the most important skills that you would need to be a lawyer and to be able to get into a very competitive law school. Okay, so next up, we have what are called the personal insight questions, PICs, or otherwise known as the essays, right? The UC essays are a different beast entirely from what you probably know in terms of the Common App personal statement, which tends to be more story-like and narrative, which makes sense because it's a little bit longer. You have up to 650 words to write a fairly compelling tale about your own life experiences. For the UCs, they made a deliberate choice to move away from that. They used to accept something similar to a personal statement for the Common App, but they decided to pick slightly shorter prompts. So they want you to write 4 out of these 8, and they only limit you to about 350 words. Now, the significance there is that it's a lot more tailored to very specific topics. So one of the key things that you want to do here is don't pick things based on whatever is easiest to you. You might want to think strategically in terms of highlighting certain strengths. So look at your profile, look at what activities you do well, look at what experiences you're most proud of that help you distinguish yourself from other UC applicants, and then pick prompts that allow you to highlight those attributes. Okay, so if you were curious, though, there was a survey in terms of which most commonly picked topics, on a given year here. And if you wanted to see the breakdown, basically the 3 most popular are leadership experiences, significant challenges, and of course your favorite academic subject. But I do want to say, though, don't let this sort of like sway your judgment. This just gives you an idea in terms of what are popular topics that people write about. I would say just go for whichever prompts allow you to showcase your strengths the best to the UCs. Okay, so why are these essays so important? Well, because other than your grades, this is really one of the few things where you actually get to weave together a compelling story of why you're a good fit for the UCs. Okay, so in essence, these essays are your face to the admissions reader to give them a sense of your uniqueness and your personality beyond just like things like your grades and your activities list. Okay, now also keep in mind, as mentioned earlier, the UCs do not do recommendation letters, and they also don't do interviews. So that's crucial here because then the essays take on a much more prominent role than, let's say, for example, many private universities where they do recommendations and interviews as well, right? So this is really the only way that you can craft the narrative in terms of why you belong. So while those distributions you saw do vary, I typically tell students there are no preferred topics. Okay, you can pick the ones that highlight your strengths the most. In fact, there's even prompt 8, which is an open-ended prompt. So if you really couldn't find a prompt that fits something that you want to tell the UCs, just pick prompt 8, right? So that would definitely serve you well in terms of just being able to write something that you think can make a difference in terms of your case. Okay, so keep in mind, no one of these essays can be a strike against you that rules out your candidacy. So typically the way the UC admissions readers are trained, they are taught to look at these essays as either something that adds value to your application, or it could be viewed as kind of like a missed opportunity. You're like, I didn't get as much information as I liked. So it's more of like a neutral. It doesn't really hurt you in the sense that they would reject you on the basis of a certain essay. But given how competitive the pool is, if it doesn't add value to your application, then it's, like it says here, a missed opportunity, right? So it's one other thing that someone else could do better than you or kind of move in front of you in terms of their eyes, okay? So each of these essays does need to bring something unique to the table, right? Okay, so what are essays that add value to your application? Well, typically they say it adds value to your application if it gives them insight and context into the application, and it allows them to get a closer look at a student's motivations, right? So this could be done in a number of ways. Your most important activities, if you've done some volunteering, those are all good things to do. It's important for you to use these essays to put a spotlight on things that were not already revealed elsewhere in your application. So simply you talking about how you did well on an AP biology class doesn't really help that much because they could just see your grades, right? So try to focus on the things that are not necessarily seen beyond just pure numbers, okay? So the most successful essays have the student's own voice shine through, as opposed to just trying to write things that you think that admissions people just want to hear, okay? It's also important, the UCs definitely want to hear a lot of concrete examples and information that give them a fuller context into your experiences. The UCs aren't really looking at these things as writing samples per se. So I often tell students, think of these essays almost like an interview. They really want to get something clear and specific and substantive about each of those topics that they're asking about, right? So it's better to be very straightforward, not necessarily try to use a lot of like flowy, flowery rhetoric or just, overly depend on things like dialogue, which actually gets me to my next point, right? Essays that are considered missed opportunities are ones that rely too much on things like creative writing elements. What the UC admissions people say is that they don't need to be in the moment or in the scene with you, right? So if you're trying to be overly dramatic with it and make it seem like they're in the middle of your own personal short story, that's not the best way to answer these, okay? The UC admissions readers typically call these elements fluff. They don't really need the fluff. They really want to get right into it and see like the substance or the meat of the essay itself, okay? Try not to list too much in the essay or repeat information elsewhere, okay? You will have ample opportunity to talk about certain activities in the activity section because you will get more than twice the character count than you do on the Common App. So you actually have a little bit more space to elaborate on your activities there, okay? Weaker essays also lack enough concrete details. Some essays may focus too much on the experiences of other people and not the student. Okay, these can be viewed as a little bit tangential or irrelevant. If they're writing about a further experience in the past, because the primary focus of these essays should be on your high school experience or your high school years. So if you did focus on something prior to high school, make sure to show how those traits or those qualities are relevant today, okay? All right, so some recommendations dealing with the essays. I typically tell students, don't be afraid to be yourself, okay? Admissions people can spot a fake very easily, right? They can tell based on the tone, they can tell based on the style of the writing, whether or not it's just not the voice of a teenager, okay? So oftentimes it's important for you to be able to prepare in advance. So even now, right, it's just the early days of the summer, you can start working on your UC application essays because the prompts won't change. Whereas on the Common App, you have to wait a little bit later until August 1st for those prompts to come out. For these, you can work on them during the summer, right? And it'll probably get you a nice head start, so you're not going to be as stressed out when those early action or early decision applications are available, okay? Definitely, it's helpful to get the advice of professionals like HS2 counselors, but there's a balance that needs to be struck there, right? So these advisors can help you amplify your voice, but if it replaces your own voice, that becomes problematic. Like I said, UC admissions readers can spot a fake very easily, okay? Especially so if you get tempted to do things like use AI, like ChatGPT to write your essays for you. I'm pretty sure admissions, like the UC admission systems already have like software in place to be able to detect whether or not you used AI to generate these essays. But it also doesn't help you if it's pretty clear that, that the essays themselves have been like overly edited where it loses the voice, okay? So as I mentioned earlier, it makes sense for you to submit the applications earlier within the filing period that you're given, okay? Okay, next we'll talk about your activity profile, right? So it's also important to have your activities in good order to be really impressive. So whereas I said earlier about 7 factors deal directly with your grades, 4 of the 13 factors deal more so with your various extracurricular involvements, right? So your activities and awards. So some of the things that you need to know in terms of the evaluation process here. So your extracurricular profile signals to the admissions reader that you're willing to take the initiative to participate in activities that prepare you for college and your major, and that you'll also be part of your school community. Okay, so fields like leadership, that's why there's a leadership essay, can be an important value added qualification, because of course, what UC campus doesn't want a student who could be a leader in their own campus as well, right? So also the reason why there's an explicit prompt for community or school service is that, yeah, I mean, many of these schools do want people who will be active contributors to this school community, the student community, you know, like the entire university community. Okay, so academically, though, like there's a higher premium may be placed on things like research or internships because it actually shows higher level preparation for certain majors. So if you do have these types of activities, wonderful. However, not all majors are conducive to having activities of this nature, right? So, I mean, see what fits best and use your time to be able to have activities that show your strong passion for and, you know, strong preparation for those majors. Okay, now this is a little bit of a screenshot of what the actual, you know, page is on the UC app to fill in your activities. Some things to note here is that while the Common App only allows you 10 slots for your activities, the UC app actually allows you up to 20 slots. So you have more things to fill in. You also have more than double, like I said, the character count. You have 350 characters on the UC application, whereas you only really have about 150 characters on the Common App. One thing to note, though, is that whereas the Common App does have a separate honors or awards section where you have up to 5 slots, that's actually built into the 20. So if you had 15 and if you had like 5 honors in the Common App and then 10 activities, that will account for 15 out of the 20 slots in your Common App or in your UC app. So you would still have an extra 5. You know, you have a net 5 slots available compared to the Common App. Okay. One last thing to note here is that you do want to be strategic about the order in which you enter your activities in the Common App or the UC app, because unlike the Common App, where there are little up and down arrows that you can slide them up or down, depending on what preference of order you want, they don't have that on the UCs, or at least not yet. It'd be a pleasant surprise if they did it for this year. So you do have to map it out in advance in terms of the relative order of your activities on the UC application itself. Okay. So some overarching recommendations. So it's really important when you're thinking about which activities you want to prioritize to have ample support for your chosen major. So unlike some private schools where they're not really making a decision based on your, your applied major, I guess. So like very selective private universities like Harvard or Stanford are on the record as saying they don't pick people based on the major you put on your application. The UCs do, though, for the most part, right? They look at which school you're applying to, they look at what major you're picking, and they do factor that in terms of their evaluation of whether or not they want to accept you, okay? So having strong evidence for your major is really important, okay? Next, if possible, try to show long-term commitment to your activities by starting them early in high school and continuing them for multiple years. The UCs also prioritize activities that show that you can go above and beyond your curriculum for your chosen major. So activities like internships, research projects, and competitions can help you stand out from an already crowded applicant pool. And then lastly, since most of the people from your high school probably applied at the same UCs and you have access to a lot of the same activities, it's really important to go ahead and have at least 1 or 2 unique activities that not all your friends do, okay? And that's, I think, why summer is really important, because during the school year, you have access to much the same clubs as everybody else in your high school, but really planning out those summers and finding activities that show that you're very interested in certain academic fields, or just to kind of like show that you're definitely much more diverse and interested in a lot of different activities can make you stand out even more, okay? All right, so briefly, I just want to talk to you about how HS2 can help you stand out a little bit more, and then I'll pass it along to our HS2 student in a little bit here. So a little bit about HS2. So every single year we have proven results, right? We have a track record of getting good results in terms of our students getting into most of the top colleges. So yes, you know, we do pride ourselves in helping top students get into the elite universities, but you know, I'm also just as proud of the students who didn't even think they can get into a UC campus, but then got into it because we were able to help them reach more than what they thought their potential could allow them to get, okay? Next, we also do have several online classes ranging from AP preview classes to help you get a leg up and help you prepare more for your upcoming difficult classes next year. We also have preparation for the new digital SAT test, right? We also have traditional paper ACT classes as well. And we do have multiple format classes, some on the weekend and some on the weekdays, to allow you some flexibility in your schedule if you have other activities already planned this summer. Also, we do have, like I mentioned earlier, offerings from UC Riverside, right? So to allow you to get college level courses that are already pre-approved to satisfy UCG A through G, or no, sorry, your general education requirements for the UCs. So we do have a course for applied data science, which is applicable for a number of fields, whether you want to go for like fields like business, computer science, or even some of the natural sciences. Data science, is now a very in-demand field, because if you wanted to do research, many professors will probably want you to be able to do some basic data analysis. So this is going to be an incredibly valuable skill set to have. And then for students who do want to be able to take an introduction to business class, this is a wonderful opportunity for you to get like a little bit more early preparation for this if you're a younger student. Or even if you're interested in another STEM field, if you're like a bio student, you might want to take a business class if you want to go into the pharma industry. Or if, let's say, you wanted to go into hospital administration, having a business class could be tremendously helpful in that regard. Or if you're going to go into engineering, right? Having a business background is tremendously useful these days, because if you wanted to be like a tech entrepreneur and start your own company, having some rudimentary business knowledge is going to be really, really important these days, even if you're like this wonderful, innovative creator. Okay.